I am not suicidal.
Stop knocking on our side.
I am not suicidal, and I am innocent. I could have said that I was guilty a long time ago.
Do you think fame or million-dollar contracts can shield a black superstar from the brutality of the justice system? Think again. Once those courtroom doors swing shut, the gods of the entertainment industry suddenly become small, trembling, and entirely helpless before the judge. Today, we are uncovering the 15 most insane and shocking moments in history where black icons faced devastating verdicts, from life in prison without parole to decades buried away behind bars. We're talking about agonizing screams for justice, desperate tears shed in their twilight years, or the chilling silence of a crumbling legend. Are they truly criminals deserving of their punishment, or merely pawns crushed by a deeply prejudiced system? Brace yourself, because it's time to pull back the curtain on the brutal truth. 15. O.J. Simpson, when a legend falls and the struggle to reclaim a legacy. Orenthal James. O.J. Simpson was not just a name, he was once a towering icon for the black community in America. From a brilliant football player breaking countless records to a shining movie star in Hollywood, O.J. was living proof of the dream of reaching the top despite society's invisible barriers. However, his life became a series of controversial ups and downs, and the true tragedy that closed that glorious chapter took place in a Las Vegas hotel room in 2007. The incident leading to the sentence that stripped O.J. Simpson of his freedom stemmed from a simple motive. He just wanted back what was his. Instead of a robbery driven by sudden greed, O.J. and a group of men broke into the hotel room of sports memorabilia dealers to reclaim sports relics, family photos, and personal items of immense sentimental value that he claimed had been stolen from him. Legally, taking matters into his own hands with a weapon was wrong. But from a human perspective, it was the ultimate outrage of a black man wanting to protect the last pieces of his legacy and personal honor. The act may have been impulsive, but it carried a completely understandable underlying pain. At his 2008 sentencing, the image of the proud superstar, holding his head high and radiant as when he won his 1995 trial, was gone. Standing before the judge was now just a tired, haggard 61-year-old man facing the prospect of collapse. The atmosphere in the courtroom sank as O.J. Simpson completely lost his composure. He sobbed, his voice cracking with tremors, his chest heaving with difficulty. With desperate eyes, he looked toward the judge and uttered a heartfelt plea. "I didn't want to steal from anybody. I'm sorry, I just wanted my personal things back." It was a shocking moment, and once invincible icon, now having to cast aside all pride, tearfully begging for empathy from an inherently cold justice system. Despite his belated plea and the motive behind his actions, the court delivered what many considered a relentlessly harsh punishment: 33 years in prison. To the community, the number 33 for this crime carried the heavy weight of retaliation from a justice system that still seemed bitter about his success in the previous trial, rather than a fair sentence for the actual crime committed. 14. R. Kelly, the silence of a guilty king. Robert Sylvester Kelly was once an unshakable monument, holding the title of the King of R&B. For the black community, R. Kelly's music transcended mere entertainment. These were the essential melodies at weddings and family parties, and it was a source of immense pride when he wrote globally resounding inspirational songs like "I Believe I Can Fly." However, behind the brilliant aura of a genius lay a life painted with tragedy and darkness. The allegations that brought R. Kelly to the stand were incredibly severe, involving decades of abuse and manipulation. His misconduct was clear, and the law had to do its job. But for a fairer and deeper perspective on the root of the problem, we must look at where he came from. R. Kelly was born and raised in the harsh slums of Chicago. Young Robert was virtually illiterate and carried massive psychological trauma from being a victim of abuse in his childhood. Society at the time ignored the pain of a poor black child, and the world only truly cheered for him when they discovered his lucrative singing ability. A severe lack of education, coupled with psychological wounds that were never healed, created a deep void in his awareness, pushing him into a tragic cycle of trauma. The moment at his sentencing trial lacked screams or explosive tears, yet it left a haunting impact. Facing a massive sentence, R. Kelly's reaction was an eerie silence. He sat with his head bowed, his face completely hidden behind a mask and dark sunglasses. Throughout the trial, he was utterly blank and soulless, showing not a single spark of emotion or reaction. For those who once loved him, watching a great artist who used to command every stage shrink into an empty shell was a heartbreaking sight. That lifelessness seemed less like an act of defiance and more like the final defense mechanism of a mind that had completely shattered and disconnected from reality. Consequently, the justice system handed down consecutive sentences, 30 years and 20 years in prison, closing the door on his freedom and ensuring he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The fall of E.R. Kelly leaves a massive void and endless remorse in the public's heart, mourning a brilliant talent and grieving for a human being who might have been saved if society had cared for and healed his childhood wounds early on. 13. C. Murder, the scream of innocence and an uncompromising war. Corey Miller, known to the hip-hop world by his stage name C. Murder, was not just a core member of the No Limit Records empire, but also an iconic pillar of Southern rap. His music was gritty and authentic, carrying the aspirations and voices of countless young black men trying to escape the cycle of poverty in the ghettos. He represented a generation pulling themselves out of the darkness to touch the American dream. Tragedy struck in 2002 when he was accused of a fatal shooting that took the life of a 16-year-old at a Louisiana nightclub. The loss of a life is a heartbreaking tragedy, but what outraged the community was a trial process riddled with shadows. Looking at the big picture, C. Murder's case exposed the deep flaws and prejudices of the legal system against successful black men from the streets. In the years that followed, key witnesses came forward, admitting they were coerced and threatened by authorities into giving false testimony against the rapper. Furthermore, the jury convicted him based on an old Louisiana law that allowed for a conviction without a unanimous verdict. This rushed sentencing led many to believe he was the victim of a setup aimed at taking down an influential voice. When his life sentence without parole was announced, C. Murder's reaction in court was not one of collapse or tearful begging. Instead, it was a burning flame of proud indignation. He stood tall, his eyes resolute, displaying fierce outrage and refusing to bow to a trial he deemed unjust. C. Murder's madness was not a loss of control, but an iron will, refusing to lower his head and accept a charge he insisted was a frame-up. That unyielding reaction touched the hearts of millions who had felt powerless before the system. C. Murder was stripped of his freedom, confined within the harsh walls of a prison. However, the life sentence could not break his spirit. Instead of fading into oblivion, he turned prison into a new front line. He staged hunger strikes to protest poor living conditions and continually released music from behind bars to call for justice. His fierce resistance sparked the massive Free C. Murder movement across America, making him an immortal symbol in the fight against systemic injustice. 12. Big Lurch, the tragedy of a shattered mind and the remorse at the bottom of society. Antron Singleton, widely known by his stage name Big Lurch, was once a highly energetic talent in the underground hip-hop communities of Texas and California. His music was a true reflection of the harsh rhythm of street life, where many young black men struggled daily with poverty and pitfalls. However, the rapper's desire to change his life took the darkest and most horrifying turn, transforming him from a promising artist into a victim of the very cruel shadows that society carelessly ignores. Big Lurch's 2002 case was often thoroughly exploited by the media from a sensationalist angle, as he took the life of his roommate in an incredibly barbaric act. The crime is undeniable and deeply tragic, but to judge fairly, we must look straight at the truth. Big Lurch was not himself at the time. He committed the act in a state of complete unconsciousness under the terrifying influence of PCP, an extremely potent hallucinogenic drug. He did not act out of cold blood or premeditated malice. His mind had been hijacked by chemicals. This tragedy reflects a massive and unjust gap in society: the lack of mental health and rehabilitation support programs for vulnerable Black communities, leaving them to struggle alone until they fall into the abyss. Big Lurch's madness in court took on a completely different and utterly haunting tone. There were no screams, crying, or resistance. He appeared before the bench with an eerie, spine-chilling blankness. His eyes were empty, completely disconnected from the real world. He testified in a vague tone that he thought he was fighting the devil. That cold demeanor was not a defiance of the justice system, but the tragic ruins of a permanently destroyed brain. Standing before the court was not a monster, but merely an empty shell of a man who once held big dreams. In the end, Big Lurch received a life sentence, permanently locked behind bars. The legal system quickly punished him to close the file, but ignored treating the root cause of the drug epidemic ravaging the community. The case closed in absolute sorrow, leaving a cautionary tale about a tragic life swept away by the harshness of circumstances and a lack of compassion. 11. Michael Jace. Pressure beneath the spotlight and a long slide into despair. Michael Jace was once a familiar and proud face on television screens. Famous for his roles in the classic movie Forrest Gump and the hit TV series The Shield, he represented the image of a talented Black actor striving to secure his place in a Hollywood industry riddled with barriers and inequality. To the community, he was proof of perseverance and success through sheer talent. However, beneath the glamorous facade of a star, Michael Jace was being crushed by horrifying pressures. The tragedy occurred in 2014 when he fatally shot his wife, April Jace, a heartbreaking family disaster. Yet, if we look fairly at the context of the time, we see the shadow of a man sinking into a deep pit of despair. When his career stalled, Jace faced bankruptcy, mounting debt, and an inability to find new roles. For a Black man always bearing the pressure to be the solid breadwinner of the family, financial failure broke his self-esteem. His mind shattered under the weight of depression, dead ends, and a feeling of utter helplessness. While his violent act was completely wrong and inexcusable, it stemmed from a total mental collapse, not from a cold-blooded, evil nature. The sentencing moment at his 2016 trial offered a choked-up and intensely tense scene. There was no stubbornness or denial of guilt. Michael Jace stood before the court as a completely broken man. With tears streaming down his face and a trembling, choked voice, he turned to his wife's family and poured out remorse from the bottom of his heart. "There is no justification for my actions that night. I am deeply sorry." But the peak of the drama came from the refusal of forgiveness. Right as Jace was sobbing uncontrollably, the victim's mother angrily shook her head, stood up abruptly, and walked straight out of the courtroom. The image of a humiliated, lonely Michael Jace facing his guilt in court while being turned away by the very people he once called family was a breathtakingly haunting moment. With a sentence of 40 years to life, Michael Jace permanently lost his freedom. His story ends in bitterness, leaving a heartbreaking lesson about the dark side of fame. It serves as an alarm bell regarding mental health and the brutal pressures of money, which pushed a once beloved talent to the brink, destroying a family and burning down the entire legacy he had worked so hard to build. 10. Tay K, a teenage shock and a brutal sentence for youthful mistakes. Tamor McIntyre, known to the world as Tay K, was once an explosive rap phenomenon among the youth. His hit track, The Race, was not just a chart-dominating song, but an anthem of rebellion, representing the voices of Black teens growing up on the harsh streets. Tay K's natural talent was undeniable, but that aura faded far too quickly before he could even reach adulthood. The shocking 2016 case where Tay was involved in a home invasion robbery that led to murder was a heartbreaking tragedy. The act was a serious violation of the law, and he had to be held accountable. However, evaluating this fairly and humanely requires looking at his background. Tay got tangled in the legal system when he was just 16 years old. He was born and raised in an environment where violence was an everyday occurrence, with both parents having ties to gangs and the prison system. Tay is the classic product of a social system that has abandoned poor black children, leaving them to survive among dark pitfalls without a single proper guide. The boy was pushed into the mud by his environment before making rash and wrong decisions on his own. At his sentencing, the drama didn't come from piercing screams, but from the ultimate psychological contrast. Up to that point, Tay had always worn an arrogant, reckless shell to protect himself from the world. But standing before the judge, that shell completely shattered. Hearing the judge coldly hand down a massive 55-year prison sentence, Tay did not fight back. He stood stunned, dazed, his eyes wide with panic, looking hauntingly somber. The most maddening moment here was when realization hit. A kid not even 20 years old suddenly realized that his entire youth, ambitions, and life had been wiped out by the justice system in a split second. A 55-year sentence for a teenager is essentially a brutal, unforgiving life sentence. It exposed the harshness of the legal system, ready to strip a young black man of every chance to rebuild his life, equating a lost child with an irredeemable criminal. In the end, music lost a highly promising talent, and Tay youth was buried behind bars, leaving an endless ache for the children robbed of their futures right from the starting line. 9. Suge Knight. The fall of a godfather and survival instincts in a panic. Marion Suge Knight was not just a name. He was once the ultimate power player in the American music industry. As the co-founder of the Death Row Records empire, he shaped the entire golden era of West Coast hip-hop, elevating talents like Tupac Shakur, Dr. Dre, and Snoop Dogg to global peaks. Suge Knight was the symbol of absolute power, a black man who rose from the gritty streets of Compton to build a multi-hundred-million-dollar estate, forcing the white elite to watch their step and play by his rules. But that immense power came at an exorbitant price. His 2015 case, where he ran over and killed Terry Carter with his truck, was a horrifying tragedy. Yet, putting oneself in his shoes to see the full picture, it wasn't entirely the cold-blooded murder the media spun. At that time, Suge Knight was surrounded by enemies. He had survived multiple assassination attempts, carried numerous bullet fragments in his body, and lived in a state of extreme hypervigilance. When ambushed, threatened, and attacked right at his car window by a group of men, his survival instinct kicked in. In a moment of absolute panic, combined with failing eyesight due to illness, he slammed on the gas blindly to escape. Taking a life was a catastrophic mistake, but the underlying motive stemmed from the primal fear of a man backed into a corner, desperately fighting for his own life. Suge Knight's moment in court brought a completely different kind of madness, an astonishing docility and collapse. Audiences and the media expected the aggressive, arrogant demeanor of an untamable godfather. Instead, they saw a frail, trembling older man who repeatedly fainted in court. His silence, his physical and mental breakdown, were proof of how illness and the crushing weight of the system had pulverized such a giant. Taking a plea deal for 28 years in prison at the age of 53 was effectively a life sentence, stripping away the rest of Suge Knight's life. The death row empire fell, and the justice system finally buried a powerful black mogul they had always considered a thorn in their side. His fall leaves a sorrowful lesson, a legend who created a great culture, but in the end was swallowed by the very shadow of the streets and the coldness of the law. 8. Jussie Smollett, a scream amidst Hollywood's harsh vortex. Jussie Smollett was once a great source of pride, a breakthrough icon on American television. Through his wildly successful role in the hit series Empire, he not only proved his exceptional talent as a black artist, but also bravely represented the voices of minority communities. Jussie was living proof of breaking the invisible barriers and deep-seated prejudices that had long existed in a notoriously strict Hollywood entertainment industry. However, that brilliant career took a dark turn with his highly controversial case in 2019. Jussie was accused of staging a hate crime attack against himself. The court found him guilty of lying to authorities. Fabricating evidence is clearly against the law, but stepping back to look at the context, the story has many psychological layers. As a black man, Jussie truly lived with real safety threats every day. The pressure of constantly fighting for justice and combating covert discrimination in Hollywood weighed heavily on his mind. Though his methods were a grave mistake, his underlying motive seemed to stem from a desperate desire to make the world pay attention to the injustices and hatred his community endured. The moment at Jussie's sentencing became one of the most explosive events on the internet, but behind it lay sheer terror. Upon hearing the judge hand down a 150-day jail sentence, Jussie completely lost control. He decisively pulled down his mask, stood up straight, raised his fist in the air, and repeatedly screamed, "I am not suicidal. I am innocent. If anything happens to me when I go in there, I did not do it to myself." This madness and uproar was not an act of arrogance. It was the spontaneous self-defense instinct of a person gripped by a chilling fear of the prison system, a place that always harbors brutal dangers for black men. The aftermath of the case was a fatal blow, almost incinerating the entire legacy and reputation Jussie had worked years to build. He walked out of the courtroom with a collapsed future, but his desperate scream left a profound, haunting effect. It serves as a heartbreaking testament that even the proudest stars can be crushed by media pressure, the harshness of public opinion, and the absolute terror of a cold justice system. 7. Tory Lanez, a fleeting mistake and the howl of generational pain. Daystar Peterson, globally known by his stage name Tory Lanez, was once a formidable force in the global music industry. With natural talent in both singing and rapping, he represented the tireless efforts of a black artist rising from nothing to secure a place in a fiercely competitive industry. Tory's music was deeply personal, full of pride, and driven by a desire to reach the top. However, his stellar career hit a tragic pitfall after the fateful night in 2020 involving female rapper Megan Thee Stallion. The use of a weapon and causing injury is a grave mistake before the law, and no one can justify it. But to view the incident through a more forgiving and multidimensional lens, we must understand the chaotic context of that night. It was a tragedy fueled by alcohol, bitter personal arguments, and the immense pressure of the toxic ego-driven culture in the entertainment world. Tory's outburst was more like a momentary loss of control in a drunken state and extreme agitation, rather than a calculated, cold-blooded crime. Sadly, instead of seeing this as the tragedy of reckless youth, the media quickly turned it into a ruthless witch hunt, stripping away any humane perspective of a man grappling with his own mistakes. The sentencing moment in court completely shattered the proud armor Tory had tried to wear throughout the trial. Facing a massive sentence, he did not react with anger, but sank into sheer despair. Standing before the judge, Tory dropped his artist ego, offering choked-up, earnest words, begging the judge for leniency and calling Megan someone I care for dearly. Yet, the most maddening and heartbreaking outburst happened just outside the courtroom hallway. Tory's biological father screamed in tears, furiously condemning the justice system for stealing his son. The father's choked sobs tore through the space, reflecting the generational pain of millions of black families forced to stand helplessly by as the prison system swallows their loved ones' futures. The 10-year prison sentence is a harsh punishment, robbing a talented artist of both his youth and the peak of his career. The story closes in bitterness, leaving deep sorrow for an entire community forced to witness two black icons hurt each other, only to eventually succumb to a cold legal system. 6. Bill Cosby, The Wrath of America's Dad. Bill Cosby was not just a comedian, he was once a monumental historical figure. Through the classic The Cosby Show, he smashed terrible stereotypes about black people on American television. Instead of roles as criminals or the impoverished, he brought forth the image of an educated, successful, and deeply loving family. To the community, he was America's dad, an educational icon, and the man who paved the way for generations of black artists to enter the barrier-filled entertainment world. When allegations surrounded him in his twilight years, the entire world seemed to turn its back on the legend. Past mistakes are for the courts to clarify, but looking at the case through the lens of legal fairness, we see a justice system that played dirty. The crux of the matter is that decades ago, a prosecutor made a deal promising never to criminally prosecute Cosby if he agreed to testify in a civil suit. Yet, years later, as public pressure mounted, the system backtracked, ignoring its own legal commitments to drag an 80-something, blind and frail old man to court. For many, stripping away his basic legal rights, due process, exposed an ingrained habit. The system is ready to change the rules of the game just to tear down a powerful black icon. Bill Cosby's most explosive moment didn't happen on his final sentencing day, but during a tense hearing prior. When the prosecutor argued that his bail should be revoked because Cosby was a flight risk, absolute fury erupted. That suggestion was a blatant insult to a blind old man who couldn't even walk on his own. Losing his usual composure, Cosby suddenly pointed directly at the prosecutor and yelled, "You're an asshole!" This madness was not an irrational outburst, but the righteous wrath of a man realizing he was being cornered and stripped of his last shred of dignity by the system. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, but just a few years later, the Supreme Court overturned the conviction and released him precisely because of the prosecution's flawed legal backtracking. Bill Cosby walked out of prison, but his lifelong legacy had been completely burned to the ground. The story ends in bitterness, leaving an agonizing question about fairness. Is the law serving justice, or just using the name of justice to utterly destroy the monuments it no longer wishes to tolerate? 5. Foxy Brown, the bitter tears of the Queen of Rap. The famous female rapper Foxy Brown, born 1978, had to appear in court in 2007 for violating probation terms related to an assault case. Although the sentence was only 1 year in jail, her reaction in the courtroom was incredibly intense. Contrary to her usual confidence, Foxy Brown completely lost control upon hearing the verdict. She broke down in uncontrollable sobs, argued continuously, and displayed profound shock at the judge's decision. Her panicked and disrespectful demeanor even prompted the judge to reprimand her right there in court. This event marked a major low point in the rapper's career, showing her desperation when forced to face the law. 4. Rick James, the late confession of a funk star. Rick James, the icon of funk music, stood trial in 1993 at age 45 on charges of kidnapping and assault under the influence of narcotics. At the trial, the arrogant rock star persona completely vanished. Standing before the bench, Rick James looked extremely haggard, panicked, and dazed. His most striking reaction was his constant blaming of drugs, insisting that the narcotics had turned him into an unconscious monster. He begged the court to let him go to rehab instead of prison. Despite his pleas, he still received a sentence of over 5 years behind bars. 3. Ronald Isley, the tears of a 65-year-old legend. Ronald Isley, the legendary lead singer of the Isley Brothers, was sentenced to 3 years and 1 month in prison in 2006 at the age of 65 for large-scale tax evasion. The image of an elderly R&B icon having to stand trial deeply moved the public. At his sentencing, Ronald Isley broke down entirely and wept bitterly. He and his legal team presented a mountain of medical records, including the fact that he had recently suffered a stroke and was undergoing cancer treatment, to beg for leniency. His greatest fear was dying behind bars. Despite his failing health, the court remained firm on enforcing the sentence as a deterrent against economic crimes. 2. Wilson Pickett. When the rebel trembled and begged. Wilson Pickett was an R&B/soul legend, famous for the nickname Wicked Pickett due to his hot temper. In 1993, at age 52, he was sentenced to 1 year in jail for drunk driving after severely injuring an 86-year-old pedestrian. In stark contrast to his usual gritty image, Pickett exhibited extreme trembling and fear in court. He sobbed uncontrollably, showed immense remorse, and repeatedly pleaded about the alcoholism that had destroyed his life. The moment a man in his 50s cried tears of terror over the prospect of going to jail left a profound impression. 1. Mystical, a late apology from the abyss. The Grammy-nominated rapper Mystical, born 1970, went to court in 2004 on charges of sexual battery and extortion. At the time, his career was at its absolute peak. Facing a 6-year prison sentence, Mystical completely collapsed. Gone was the tough exterior of a street rapper. He wept pitifully before the judge. Mystical continuously sobbed out apologies to the victim and her family while desperately begging the judge for a chance to rebuild his life. This sentence pushed his music career into a long, frozen hiatus. The names above were once at the pinnacle of fame, cheered by millions, but the line between a monument and the abyss is separated by exactly one strike of a gavel. Whether they are victims of circumstance or individuals paying the price for personal mistakes, their downfalls leave indelible shockwaves in the community. This is not just a story about the law, but a warning about the heavy price of power, drugs, and invisible pressures. Ultimately, the court may hand down the sentence, but history is the final judge. Whose side are you on in these highly controversial cases? Who do you think received the most unjust sentence, or who deserved to pay the price for their crimes? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the hottest topics about the untold dark corners of the entertainment industry.